Hi, YouTube fans. This is Matt of Post April 6th YouTube channel. Well, I've got another really good story in mind for you. It's going to be quite controversial. And the name of the man he's another person's got another one-of-a-kind name, and he's been through quite a lot. And what happens before he makes a really big decision in his life, where he goes from one side of the United States to another. It was the result of his girlfriend not doing something to him directly, but doing something that is really selfish to herself. Yeah. Okay, so why don't I go ahead and get started. The story idea and the main part of the story itself takes place on March 14th, 2021. And the name of the person is Glenn George Parkman. His date of birth was December 4th, 1997 at 4:33 p.m. And where his mother gave birth to him at was, the hospital has a different name now, but I think back then it had its more original name, and it was likely this name, Intermountain Health, Northglenn, Colorado, because you see his mother and father weren't wealthy, but they were fairly they were comfortable, a little better than fairly. They were comfortable financially. They were almost in the upper middle class. Yeah. They had a really nice house in Northglenn, Colorado. Because Northglenn is way, way out there in the northern edge, where the Denver metro area is near the end. And his locations of residency, because he only lived at 3 different addresses before he moved to Los Angeles. And here's where he lived. The 1100 block of West 125th Drive in Northglenn. From December 4th to day of, well, I mean, he didn't physically live there because his mother was with him in the hospital for 3 to 4 days before she could be released. So from December 4th, 1997 until January 28th, 2028. And the reason why there was a move, it wasn't because his family decided to go live somewhere else, or they wanted to get a different house and live somewhere else for that reason. It was because mother divorced the dad. The dad was a drunken jerk. And he wasn't violent, but he was, the way he would sit and watch TV, he would be a rambling pain in the ass. And she was sick of it. His mother. The mother, we'll call her Mindy. Yeah. Mindy Parkman. So the mother was making quite good money as a CPA, certified public accountant, and she had pretty good credit, and she got things arranged to move to a house that was, I mean, normally she wouldn't do this, but she trusted these people and she thoroughly researched them. It was a house that was rent to own. It was on the 6700 block of East Expo Avenue, Denver, Colorado, 80224 or 80246, something like that. And it was in the area that would be near Garland Park an actual public park. And it would also be near an area that would be near the Virginia Vale neighborhood, and it would also be near George Washington or Washington High School. I think they call it GW High School. And he lived there with his mother from January 28, 2028 until January 2nd, 2016. And you see, on January 2nd, 2016, he was, he had just turned 18 a month before that on December 4th. And Mama saw to it that he got, she either co-signed or, convinced the powers that be to approve him for an apartment, and he got in a one-bedroom, one-bathroom apartment with a nice old-fashioned but in good condition stove and kind of a nice old-school look on the 200 block of East Bayard. And this is an area in Denver, zip code 80209. Now, I don't know the specific region or area, but I know this much. 200 South Bayard is near Broadway and Bayard. I know that much. It's in the lower southeast, where the southeast is near the end, and you're close to the northeast part of Denver. Direction-wise. And he lived there from January 2nd, 2016 until March 12th, 2021. Job history. He only held one job, but he held it a long time. Or for a young person, that's a pretty long time. He was first a cashier, and then he became a supervisor for Hobby Lobby, located on near Louisiana and South Colorado Boulevard. And he worked there from June 11th, 2015 until March 4th, 2021. And here's what he does. Because of what happened 2 weeks before that with his girlfriend. His girlfriend, she didn't do it in his presence, she did it at her apartment. She stole a handgun from a neighbor, and she blew her brains out. Yes. And the way the two of them loved each other, she would get a little flaky sometimes, and just like, she's just been a woman. And it wasn't flaky in a way that they had relationship problems. The flakiness, what it really was she was mentally disturbed. She didn't know Christ hardly at all. And she couldn't figure out what else to do with her life. And with the way the economy was going, she was worried it was going to stay pretty much the same for at least 20, 30 years. And she took her own life. On a day off from her job at a fabric store, she snuck into a guy's apartment quickly while he was in the laundry room, and stole his gun and she goes in there, and 10 to 15 minutes later, she shot herself. That put quite a lot that was quite a major emotional toll on Glenn George Parkman's soul. And he really started to ask the Lord for help. Christ, the Son of God. And on March 4th, after he put in a 2 weeks notice with Hobby Lobby, he proceeded to sell all of his personal possessions. With it, he kept a mere handful of things. And what he sold was a love seat couch with a hide-a-bed, a twin-sized bed with a comforter and a blanket, and a three-piece thing of bed sheets and with a pillowcase, the duvet, and the bed sheet, and another set of bed sheets, and pot holders, oven mitts, about 25 different kitchen utensils, a set of 6 butter knives, 6 spoons, 6 salad forks, 6 I think what would be called standard forks, and larger spoons, and he sold at least 52 DVDs. He sold at least 100 CDs. He sold a box set. This is the only record he had because somebody gave it to him, because otherwise you were going to throw it away. It was a vinyl record box set of Eric Clapton. I believe they called that Crossroads, because I clearly remember seeing it in the late 1980s, about 1988, at a place that's no longer in business anymore called Sound Warehouse. And he sold 22 different t-shirts, 8 different dress shirts, 11 pairs of socks, 3 different pairs of shoes, 2 different pairs of what's called bedroom slippers, 3 different types of flip-flop sandals, snowshoes, about 8 different pocket knives, an entertainment stand, high-def television, 2 different DVD players, a VCR, speakers. Let's see, a CD player for a nice stereo system that he put together. I mean, these were individual components and stuff, like one of those mini sets, or one of those things where, it was all the components by one company, like Onkyo, Sony, Pioneer, or TIAC. And just all kinds of stuff. And all he had left was a backpack with 2 pairs of pants, 3 pairs of underwear, 3 different pairs of socks, and a first aid kit, and some smaller items that he could fit in the zip-up pocket in the front pocket. It was It was a light gray Jansport backpack that all the stuff was in, and also his birth certificate and proof of some insurance policies that he'd had in the past, and some paycheck stubs in a folder. About 3 months worth of paycheck stubs with Hobby Lobby. And what he did was first he, from his Samsung Galaxy smartphone, and when he brought the cell phone charger with him too. Anyways, so he called from a smartphone. He calls DIA, and he talks to a manager, and the manager just says, "Well, we're going to have to see you in person. We may have a nonprofit group that may be willing to help you. I can't guarantee that, but you have to come over here, and we have to meet with them. You have to meet with them." And he says, "Actually, let me correct that." He says, "I'm going to have to meet with you, and then I'm going to contact them and have them come down to Denver International Airport, and we're going to meet in a special conference room." And he says, "Wait a minute, is there going to be like 3 or 4 different people?" He says, "I don't know about that, but I know this much. It's only going to be two to three different people at the most in this nonprofit that I'm referring to that will help you." He says, what's the profit?" He says, "Sir, I cannot discuss that over the phone. I can't. It's against policy for me to do so. But why don't you come here, and why don't you come to the information center right by the TSA checkpoint, and you ask for me." And he writes down and the guy writes down, or excuse me, not the guy, Glenn writes down with a pen and paper, because he had a little notepad that was, he had a little notebook about like this that was light blue. Okay, so he takes a I think what he does, because see, 2 days before he decided to do this, he was staying with a friend because he vacated the apartment because the property manager desperately wanted to do some renovation. They didn't just want to clean up; they wanted to do a little renovation work before they could rent it, and they knew that they were going to have it filled like that, because there was a long list of at least 14 different prospective tenants that wanted to live in that building because it's got that nice old school look. And so he probably gets on the 3 to Alameda, the Alameda bus, and he takes it to Monaco. And then he gets on the Monaco and he goes north to not Stapleton Airport, because Stapleton Airport, long gone. It's Stapleton neighborhood. And he goes to Stapleton neighborhood or Stapleton station, something like that. Actually, you know what? It's not that. It's called Central Park, but it's near the Stapleton neighborhood. They're like this with each other. They're so close. Stapleton here, Central Park here. Okay, so he goes to Central Park Station, and he waits patiently for the A light rail or the A train, and he takes that all the way to DIA. And at the time of day that this happens, it is roughly about 2 p.m. that he arrives at DIA. He goes to the information center. I think that's what they call it. Or DIA Information Center. And he goes and talks to the clerk that is the customer service clerk that is there, and he gives the name of a guy named Darren that he talked to over the phone already. And even though he didn't come out like that, within about a little over 5 minutes, Darren comes over, and Darren is really polite, and he shakes hands with him. He says, "Okay, come on, follow me." And then he follows him to this area, and right when they get onto the elevator, he says, "Okay," he says, "we're going to go to the conference room, and we're going to discuss some things before the nonprofit group comes over and talks with you." And he says, "Great." He says, I want to get out of Denver as fast as I can." He's like, "Well, I can't guarantee that you're going to be able to get financing to get a ticket to go to LAX airport, but we'll see what we can do. There's a good chance they're going to help you, but then again, in the end, it's their call, so I can't guarantee it. I don't mean to discourage you, but that's the way things are with this nonprofit." He says, "Yeah, I understand." So they go into the conference room, and he gets on one of those business landline things, and he talks on him, and then he puts the call on hold. Darren does, and Darren turns to Glenn, and he says, "Glenn," he says, "we're going to get on speakerphone, so you'll be able to talk with these people." And then what happens is a man and a woman talk, and they're not husband and wife, they're just part of the nonprofit. And she says, "Okay, I shall be there in about 45 minutes. And then what happens is Darren, because he's got an understanding, he says, "What do you want to eat?" And he says, "Well," he says, "I'm getting pretty hungry." He says, "What are my choices?" He says, I can extend a voucher for up to $14. And then he says, and then he writes down on a little notepad inside his suit coat what he wants, because what he wants is he wants grilled ham with French fries, and he wants a chocolate milkshake. And then about a little over 10 minutes later, Darren comes back, and he says, "Okay, go ahead and have that, and I'm going to have he says, I decided to go ahead and get me a little pretzel." And Darren's eating the pretzel, and he says, and just right after the finishing, he says, "There is one other thing I have to do before they show up." And he says, "What's that?" He says, I'm going to have our TSA security person search your backpack." And he says, "Okay, I don't have anything to hide, but if that's what has to happen, we'll go ahead and call him." So he gets on the walkie-talkie, and he says what he has to say in certain verbal codes. And about a little less than 5 minutes later, a big guy he's African American, and this guy is 6'5", but he's very friendly. He's just like, yeah, he's got to check your stuff, man. And he does. He checks it all out. And he checks the pockets. He checks the I mean, he thoroughly checks this thing through and through. He has to. It's his job as a security agent. He says, okay, you're clear, you're fine. And he said, he says, we're really not supposed to have these 5-blade shaved razors, but he says, hold on. And he reaches into his pocket and he writes a little something on there. And he says, keep this in the area with your toiletries, so that way they don't confiscate it from you. Because when they see my signature, they're not going to take it away. Because you will be checked again if you take a flight to wherever it is you're going. Okay. Then what happens is about 10 minutes later, a man and a wife come knocking on the door, and Darren lets him in. And these two men ask a lot of questions, and at one point, Lynn really starts crying. Because he talks about how he found out about what happened with his girlfriend. And how sad he was when he went to her funeral. And how he just didn't understand why did she do this? I thought she was a better person than I just can't believe it. What was I supposed to look for? What was I supposed to do to try to prevent this? Was the key thing that Glenn kept thinking about over and over and over again. And then the man and the woman leave and go into a little bit of a conference with each other. And they talk for at least 10 minutes. And then they come back in. And they says, okay, here's what we're going to do. And he says, and then she says, wait a minute, before I tell you what money we can offer to you. He says, do you have a PayPal account? He says, yes, I do. He says, okay. He says, I'll be asking for your email address, but when I submit the funds to you, but let me discuss. He says, what we're going to do for you, and normally we don't do this much money, but we feel so bad for you, we have the funds available to do it. And we're going to grant you, as a gift to you, $2,000. And he's like, you'd be that nice to me? Oh my God. I don't believe it. My God. He says, okay. He says, I know you're, and then the woman says, I know you're emotionally overwhelmed and you're full of a lot of positivity, and you're grateful, and you have a good feeling of feeling overwhelmed. But I need to ask you this. He says, okay, what is it? He says, what is your email address? And he says his email address to a T, and then she, recites it back to make sure that it's 100% accurate. He says, okay, I'll go ahead and proceed to do the PayPal gift to you so that it gets to your account. And then what happens is the money is there, but it's on hold. And then what she has to do, the woman who's granting this, is they get on the phone with PayPal. And then what happens from there is, even though it takes a half hour to go through all the procedural things that PayPal has to go through to make this happen, a half hour later, it's there, 100%. And then what happens is Darren and Glenn go over to Southwest Airlines. And what they do is they get a 5:10 p.m. flight from Denver DIA to LAX. And then what happens is Darren can't do this himself. That's a big no-no. So what he does is he gets on his smartphone and he places a few phone calls with some property management people he knows here in Denver that, you know, are really in on the big picture, and they have a ton of connections. And then what happens is Darren says, he says, come here. He says, yes, what? He says, you know, he puts his hand over the phone so that even though the call's on hold, he says, okay, I know it's on mute, but I'm going to take it off mute, and you give this man your direct phone number, and he will call you, okay? Are you all right with that? He says, and Glenn says, yeah, sure. He takes it off mute, and he gives his phone number, and he gives his first name, his middle name, his last known address, and his date of birth, and the name of his mother, because you see, by the time this incident happens in George's life, on St. Patrick's Day of 2019, after his father, who was only 58 years old, after he really had tons of drinks at a party. I mean, his dad really put it away. He all of a sudden, and this is a party where there's like at least 50, 60 people, he all of a sudden goes, and he drops down to his knees, and he's dead. And somebody, even though it's a filthy thing to do because he reeks of alcohol so bad, somebody tries desperately to do chest compression and CPR to bring him back to life, but it don't work. His dad died of a massive heart attack. All right, now back to the situation. You know, this was, I'm going to say about a little after 3:15 p.m., roughly, of March 14th, 2021. A couple of minutes after Glenn talks to the Darren's smartphone. Glenn gets a call back, and he says, "Okay," he says, Here's what you should do. He says, call this phone number at this place on Canyon Drive in Hollywood 90028, or Los Angeles, Hollywood 90028. It's in Franklin Drive, and it's about a mile away from Hollywood Boulevard. You call them and you tell them my name, and they'll get you set up with an apartment. If that doesn't work, he says, you call me back at my number, and I'll come up, I'll step in with a second source myself. So immediately he writes, after Glenn is done writing all this down, he gets on the phone. Within 2 rings, a property manager picks up and takes his call, and then he says, okay, if I'm going to do this for you, he says, here's what I need from you immediately. Now, this is the property manager saying this to Glenn. He says, do you have PayPal? He says, oh, yeah. He says, do you have $500 you can send me via PayPal? He says, yes. He says, okay, what's your email address? Because I got to send you a bill, because otherwise this ain't going to happen. And he says, all right. And he gives his email address. And then he says, okay, I got to go. He says, as soon as you see that, he says, listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you. This is the property manager saying this to Glenn. He says, as soon as you get that bill, he says, you click on it and you grant the $500. And then as soon as that is done, I'll call you right back when that's been confirmed. So he gets on his app and he sees the bill. He does the step-by-step thing that he's supposed to do to get him the $500. And then what happens is he gets a phone call from this property management connection. Or no, not from the property management, from the property manager of the place in Los Angeles. I'm sorry. I should have realized that. And he says, normally we would close down at 5. And he said, but here's what I'll do for you. I'll make an exception for you. He says, when are you departing from Denver International Airport? And he says, at 5:10 p.m. And he says, okay. He says, the property manager says, you should be at LAX about 6:40. He says, as soon as you can get on your smartphone, he says, you call me at this number. And I'll tell you, I'll advise you on what to do next. He says, okay, great. So then Glenn is there at DIA for roughly about another hour and a half. When it gets to the point that it is an hour before they're supposed to take off, he goes over to the area where he gets fully checked in with Southwest Airlines, and they print out the tickets. Then what he does is he goes all the way around, and he goes all the way down the escalator through TSA. And then from there, he goes down another escalator to what I'm pretty sure is called the concourse shuttles, or the concourse shuttle. And he goes to concourse B, and then he goes over to C. I think it's going to be either C32 or C33 or C34. And he shows his tickets to the clerk that is right at the little partitioned countertop for Southwest Airlines. And it's a woman, she goes, she stamps a couple of things, and she types a couple of things in the computer. And she says, okay, go ahead and sit down. You're on group 6. Or no, wait a minute, I take that back. You're on group 2. You're on group 2. Just sit down and wait and listen for us to start calling people in to board who are in group 2. And then she says, does that make sense? And he says, Yes. He says, okay, if you have any questions between now and the time that you're supposed to board the flight, you come over and talk to me, okay? And he says, yes, okay, thank you very much. And he goes over to the waiting area, and he sits, and he waits until she gets on the thing and says Group 1, and then Group 1 stands up, waits in line, and then they go through the boarding dock. And then about 5 minutes later, Group 2 is called, and then he stands in line, he waits there, and he hands in his first ticket or whatever, and then he goes and he sits back in, I think it would be 15C or D, because it's going to be the one where it's near the window. And he sits there and he waits. And he's got a lot on his mind, but he's also really excited all at the same time. And then Group 3's on, Group 4's on, Group 5's on, and there's no Group 6. Because the number of people on this flight, because this was in the days of the COVID virus, was only about 14 people. That's not much. But, they're all quiet people and they didn't make very much noise. So then what happens is they back out, and then they wait in the area near the runway, and then they get over to the runway, and then they go, and then they start instead of being like this, all of a sudden they start going like this, all the way up into the sky. And after the flight has been going on for about an hour, and they're near the rural part of either Utah or Texas, the airline steward and stewardesses start handing out salads. And they give people a choice between a garden salad and a Caesar salad. He takes a Caesar salad. And they also pour out, it's one of those little cans of Coke, where it's like 6 fluid ounces or something. And then Glenn, eats that up fast because he just, he's got the munchies for some reason. That hamburger, no, not hamburger, that grilled cheese and ham and the French fries only kept him filled up for a certain amount of time. Now he's hungry. And then, as it's getting closer and closer to what seems like 7:20 p.m. and it's dark, it's actually 6:20 p.m. because of Pacific Standard Time instead of Mountain Standard Time. And the co-pilot makes his announcement that everybody should have their seatbelts on because the plane is getting ready to land and will be landing within 20 minutes. And he can feel the plane go like that. And he looks and he's getting closer and closer and closer to LAX. And then all of a sudden, he hears the plane go. That's the best sound effects I can make it. It lands on the ground. And then the brakes and the plane stops because, traffic of other planes that are landing about the same time. Slowly but eventually gets over to the dock that they are supposed to go to let everybody off. You know, it's the arrival location instead of the departure location. And then what happens is he gets off the plane when it's his turn, and he goes through the tunnel, and he turns on his smartphone as he's going through the tunnel. And then as soon as, because he's got his backpack over both shoulders, as soon as he gets out of the dock and he's way out in the open in the concourse that he's in, there's a voicemail message to call the number that would be the property manager's smartphone. And he calls him back and says, and the guy answers within like 3 rings, and the guy says, Glenn, Mr. Parkman, is that you? And he says, yes, Jim, this is me. He says, good. He says, here's what I'm going to do for you. He goes, okay, what's that? He says, ask an employee where not the ground transportation area is, but it is parking level 3 is, and where door 305 is, because you got to go out door 305 to be in the area that I'll be parked at. He says, okay, I'll ask him. He says, okay, as soon as you're out in that area, you call me right back, okay? And Glenn says, okay, thanks. So he goes over and he talks to a janitor. The janitor tells him where to go to talk to ground transportation, or customer service of LAX. And LAX has somebody in one of those escort. It's like a golf cart, but it's called an escort cart. And they take him over to door 305. And this isn't some metal door with the word just says 305 on it. It's painted on there, and it's sliding doors where they go together like this, and then when you walk right up to it, it goes whoop, like that. Like when you see at certain grocery stores, department stores, you name it. And he goes over there, and then he gets on the phone, and he says, okay. He says, wait right there. He says, I believe an Uber driver, I just looked at the app, is going to be coming to you. He says, I was going to do this, but I can't. So the Uber driver will be coming to you within about 6 minutes, so stay right there. Do not move. And 7 minutes later, the Uber driver pulls up, and the guy lowers his window, and he says, hi, are you Glenn Parkman? And he says, yes, I am. He says, go ahead and get in the back seat. And he does, and he sits down, and this Uber driver is a really classy, likable guy. He's a guy who's in about his mid-50s. Got nice gray hair. Got on a nice polo shirt, and got a really distinct voice. And he goes over to, it's either the 6400 block or the 6500 block of Canyon Drive. And they get there in it probably takes about 40 minutes to get there, because the distance between Denver International Airport in this area, coupled with traffic, it's going to take at least 30 minutes, I would think. Yeah, it probably takes about somewhere between 28 and 30 minutes now that I really think about it, because traffic's a little bit slow on Sundays, and this is a particularly slower than usual Sunday for some reason. And then what happens is, as soon as he walks up to the, I guess it'd be called an atrium or a corridor, where you open one door and then you press the button for the leasing office. Right after he presses the button, he can hear Jim say, he says, "Don't worry, Glenn, I see you." And within less than 10 seconds, he sees him face to face, and he opens up the door and says, "Welcome aboard, come on in." And then what he does is Glenn follows Jim into the leasing office. And in the leasing office, he has him initialize and sign like 5 pages of documents. And he says Jim says to Glenn, he says, "Normally I would ask for the rent up front. But because of the terrible tragedy that happened with your girlfriend, ending her life the way she did, you're rent-free for the remainder of only this month. But after April 1st, normally we would charge you $1,450, but for you, and this is only until January 1st of 2022, you're only going to have to pay $950. If you cannot pay rent on April 3rd, we'll give you a little bit more time to come up with a payment, but once you do come up with the money, know this: there's going to be a $75 late fee. But I think, as good of a guy as you are, I bet you're going to find a job that will pay pretty good pretty soon. So then what he does is he takes him up to apartment 112. And 112 is a quieter part of the apartment complex. And he warns Jim warns Glenn. He says, and this is right after they enter the apartment, before he starts really showing him around and giving him a lot of information about all the specific details about what's inside the apartment itself. He says, "Be quiet in here, because there's 5 elderly people that range between the age of 58 and 93. And they have pretty sensitive ears. So be quiet." This is okay. And then what happens is, in the refrigerator, there's already several good things. A liter of Coca-Cola, a Starbucks iced coffee, eggs, breakfast sausage, and there's milk. And in the freezer is like 6 different frozen foods that are from, I think, the market nearby there would probably be Gelson. It's not going to be a Safeway or a Kroger place. It's called Gelson's. And the other thing that is in one of the drawers right by the cabinetry that may be called like a credenza is a gift card for $50 with Domino's Pizza. And then they go through another drawer, and there's a gift card. There's a there's a MasterCard gift card of $100. Yeah. So then he says, because of your situation, I think you would qualify for Social Security disability. And then Glenn asked Jim, he says, you're talking about Social Security disability. Would you have the certification to set me up with that? He says, that's an interesting verbal response and choice of words, but no. Here's what I can do for you. He reaches in, and Jim reaches into his suit coat pocket. He says, contact this attorney. They will help you out. They know the ins and outs on how to get things done fairly quick. These people are rock'em sock'em, powerful attorneys at law. It's cool, great, wonderful. And then they go into the bedroom, and normally, there wouldn't be much in there. What there is there is a therapeutic queen-size bed with thick pillows, and I mean thick. And there's a headrest that only is about, instead of being like about this tall, it's only about that tall. About 12 to 16 inches high. That goes over the ending flat surface of the bed. And there's a really nice comforter that kind of has a nice 80s, 90s look. And it's brand spanking new. And in the bathroom, there is, and this is, excuse me again, I don't know why I got the hiccups. There is a nice, I think it's called, oh goodness, I hiccuped again. Okay, I did a little thing I think that's going to cure the hiccups. I think it's called BRAUN, B-R-A-U-N, electric razor. And there's also a 3-blade Bic. It's not like a 3-pack, a 4-pack, or a 5-pack. It's one individual 3-blade Bic razor that would be in some, it's wrapped up in one. It's one razor in one set of packaging, and it would be something you would find in an area where grocery stores and department stores and specialty stores would have a bunch of little trial size stuff for people who want to take a vacation, a quick vacation where it's 5 days or less. And there's shampoo in the bathtub. There's a nice shower curtain, and there's bar soap there, and there is 3 bars of oil of Olay bar soap. And he's just like, and he doesn't say anything to him, but he's thinking, I ain't no woman. I don't need no oil of Olay. Oh, well, I'll just grit and bear it until I use it up, I guess. I guess I'll just have to get used to it. And then after that, he shows him around the apartment complex. And I think he shows him where the pool is. He shows him where the there's 2 different laundry rooms, where the 2 different laundry rooms are. And he also takes him out front, and he points to different directions to where Gelson's is, and where this restaurant is, and that dry cleaner's is, and then he points over that way, and he points to where all types of retail stores and even though it's pretty far away and it's dark, he says, look really closely. Does you see that blinking light? He says, yeah. That red blinking light? I said, yeah. He says, what about it? He says, there's a hospital over there. So if you really are feeling quite ill, I suggest you go there. And then what happens is Glenn goes back to his apartment 112. He opens up, he checks the keys, because he's got 2 keys that lock the doors. And then what he does is he takes his backpack off, finally. He puts it in the closet, and he hangs up the clothes, because there's a few hangers in there. And the only towel he has, there's 1 bath towel that's on the towel rack in the bathroom. He's got no washcloths. And then he goes over by the entrance, and he uses the mailbox key. And there's a green slip that's about this big. And he knows what he's got to do is he's got to fill his name out. And he's got to turn that back in to the box itself, because he fills that out and he puts it back in there, and then he goes back up into his apartment. And then he's thinking, what do I do now? What do I do now? And he lets his smartphone charge, because his smartphone has only got about 20% power. And then after that, he makes some changes in his Domino's app. And he orders a large pizza, and he pays for it through PayPal. And the good thing is he's thinking it's probably going to be at least 45 minutes. And then what happens is he leans back like this, and he just lays on the ground, and he dozes off for about 15 minutes, and all of a sudden he hears this. On the front door of his apartment. He goes over to him, and he's got a little bit of cash on him, only about $23. And all he can do is just give the guy a $5 bill, because there's no 20s in there. It's 3 $5 bills and about 7 or 8 $1 bills. And then he sits down, and he proceeds to eat. And the napkins they gave him, that was some, but it wasn't enough. So he goes over into the bathroom, and he takes off some toilet paper, and At first he rubs his like thinking, what am I doing that for? So he washes his face and hands. And then he proceeds to eat at least a couple more slices of pizza. And he wipes his face off with the toilet paper. I mean, I know this, I shouldn't laugh at this because, you know, when you got nothing else to work with, you got to do what you got to do. But I just feel like laughing. I don't know why. And then at about 10:30, after he's had time to watch the local news through his smartphone, he takes his clothes off, and he goes to sleep. And he sleeps a long, long time. He sleeps from about 10:45 at night until 12:07 p.m. And he's like, I can't believe it. I'm in Hollywood, and yet I sleep that late. Why am I not stressed out about it? But why does I have the feeling I can't believe it? I don't get it. So then he goes in the bathroom and he showers and shaves, brushes his teeth, and puts on some deodorant. And he goes and he puts on some clothes. And he goes into the kitchen. And he gets out the eggs and the bacon, or no, the eggs and the breakfast sausage, sorry. And he's like, how am I going to cook this when I didn't bring any of that stuff with me? And he looks through the kitchen cabinetry again, and there's a fairly good sized stock pot, an 8-inch skillet and a 10-inch skillet. So it's like, this'll work. And there's a little bit of in one of the cabinetry, there's some, I think it's called Pam with butter or Pam with olive oil, something like that. It's probably Pam with butter. And he goes, psst, after he gets the things warmed up. He puts in the over easy eggs, and then he puts in about 3 to 4 strips of bacon, because he's hungry. He's really hungry. And then after he eats breakfast and he's doing a little bit of a smartphone search, it's not the police, but he gets another one of these. And he hears a woman say, "George?" And there's a woman with a briefcase with her. Now, this is fiction. This may happen in real life, but if it is, it's a rare occurrence, and it's on a limited exception to the rule situation. Who it is social services. And they sit down. She says, I really don't like to sitting on beds, but I want to lay out the paperwork and have you do this. She says, can you make your bed, and then you sit over there, and I'll sit. She's pointing to. Hold on. She says, can you sit over there by the pillows? And he nods yes. And over on this opposite end is where Glenn sits. And then what happens from then on, for the appointment, is she explains why she came over. And she also states that normally, he would have to be unemployed for 30 days. But because of his situation, we were allowed by the it's either called DHHS or DHHR. Yeah, DHHR's national headquarters in Washington, D.C. We were granted permission to make an exception to the rule. We want to set you up with an EBT SNAP food card. And he says yes. And then he fills out his paperwork that he's supposed to. And then she looks over, and then she looks into her briefcase, because there's like 3 different cards. There's like 5 different cards in there. He goes, okay, this one's yours. And he takes it and then puts it in his wallet. And then she says to him, she says, okay, if you cannot get a job, please come visit us by April 2nd, and we will cover rent for you. Because based on what I've been told after talking with Jim, one of the managers of the building, that it's only going to be $950. And he says, yes, that's correct. And they also am going to get him set up with California. I think it's either called, because see, Medicaid wouldn't be called Medicaid will not be called California Medicaid. It would be called Medi-Cal or CalCare. If it's whether they call it CalCare or whether they call it Medi-Cal, it is a catchphrase that is used for California Medicaid. And then what she does is she writes down on a piece of paper that she fills out some paper. He has to fill out some paperwork that so that this could be legally certified, and she's following procedures. Then what she does is she writes down she doesn't write it down. What she does is she gets on her smartphone and she talks to somebody at CalCare, and CalCare gives him either a user ID or an identification code. And then he writes that down, and she says, okay, you're going to be sent a CalCare card that will be the permanent one. And she also talks about other things that social services would do for him. And then they shake hands, and then she leaves. And he's happy because he's like, wow, I got a $200 budget. Or no, actually back then it would probably be more like $180. $180 budget to get some groceries. Cool. And then what happens is he has a little bit of money in his pocket. And he calls MTA about buses. And I think it would either be called trains or light rails out there. It'd be called, the way on the trains that would be used, or light rail trains or subways. They wouldn't do things like they do with RTD Denver, A line, C line, D line, E line, H line, or any of that business. They would say like blue line, green line, red line. They would do it according to the color. They use a color code as a phrase. And what he does is he goes over to, I believe it's Ralph's, on the 5400 block of Hollywood Boulevard. And one bus gets him about 2 blocks away. And then what he does is he shops for some groceries, and he buys a reusable shopping cart. Or not shopping cart, reusable shopping bag. And he puts as much as he can. In fact, he buys 2 of them. He puts as much as he can in 2 big bags. I mean, he's really hauling a load to his own apartment. Yeah. And he does more and more and more and more and more and more things until he gets a job. By the time the rent is due, and some friends helping him out, he has about $1,400 to his name. So on April 1st, he goes to a place that is only about 4 blocks away, and he gets a money order for $2 and about $3 for $950. And then he puts that in his pocket, and he's really watching like a hawk so he can keep his eyes out for people, for the type of people he think might be pickpockets or thugs that's going to hit him over the head for the money. And he gets back to his apartment building. He goes into the leasing office. He fills out the money order. He hands it in, and he gets a receipt. And then on April 4th, he gets hired on at Gelson's. Front end or front area supervisor. Yep. And he makes $23.18 an hour as a front end supervisor. Even for LA, that's fairly big. And his monthly earnings are in fact, I think it'd be $23.18. No. I take that back. $22.59. That's $903 a week. That's $3,612 a month That's $43,334 a year. Yeah. And in LA, you ain't loaded. You're just if you got an apartment that's less than $1,000 a month, you're slightly comfortable. Yeah. You ain't rich. Not even close. I mean, if you were earning that type of money 40 years ago, you ain't rich, but you're definitely financially comfortable. You're well-to-do. Not now, man. I mean, in 2026, it's a whole different ballgame. Oh, yeah. The cheapest house you're going to find in LA that ain't beat to crap, and it ain't near the Hollywood part of Los Angeles, is going to cost you, and it's going to be a 1-bedroom, 1-bathroom that is about 800 square feet. $3,080 or $300,080 or no, golly, $385,000 and change. Oh yeah, because even a house that small can go for $385,000 quite easily out there. Oh yeah, even in what they call the hood. Well, that's about it for now. I hope you all found this story interesting. I did the best I could. I really tried. And I now have 284 subscribers. There was one that went away, but he came back, he or she. And I just researched my number of hits lifetime from April 28th to this date, which is February 4th. No, actually February 5th. 2026, over 93,000 hits. It took over 3 years. It took almost 3 years to achieve that, but that's okay. Thank you, everyone, and goodbye now.